Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. There are many dwellings in my Father's house. If it were not so, I would have already told you. For I am going to prepare a place, and after I have gone and have prepared the place for you, I will return and will take you with me, so that there where I am you may be also. John 14 verses 1-3. The different states of the soul in the errant state.
The Father's house is the universe. The different dwellings are the worlds that revolve in infinite space, and they offer to incarnate spirits stations appropriate to their advancement. The diversity of worlds notwithstanding, these words may also be understood as referring to the happy or unhappy state of the spirit in the errant state. The spirit's environment, its point of view regarding things, the sensations it experiences and its perceptions will vary infinitely, depending on its degree of purification and how detached it is from material ties. While some spirits cannot leave the sphere in which they lived while incarnate, others can travel through space and go to other worlds. While certain guilty spirits wander in darkness, the blessed ones enjoy a resplendent light and the sublime spectacle of the infinite. And while the bad spirit, tormented by remorse and lamentation, frequently alone, without consolation and separated from the objects of its affection, groans under the duress of mental suffering, the righteous spirit, reunited with those whom it loves, enjoys the delights of indescribable bliss. There are therefore many mansions, although they are neither circumscribed nor localized.
The different categories of inhabited worlds.
From the teaching given by the spirits, one arrives at the understanding that the various worlds are in conditions very different from one another as to the degree of the evolved or less evolved status of their inhabitants. Among them are those whose inhabitants are physically and morally even less evolved than those of Earth, others' inhabitants are of the same level, and still others' inhabitants are more highly evolved to differing degrees in every respect. On lower order worlds, existence is completely material, the passions reign supreme and moral life is almost non-existent. To the degree that moral life is developed, the influence of matter diminishes in such a way that, on more advanced worlds, life is entirely spiritual, so to speak. On intermediate worlds, there is a mixture of good and evil, with the predominance of one or the other, according to the degree of advancement. Although it is not possible to make an absolute classification of the various worlds, one can, nevertheless, due to their status and destiny, and based on the more accentuated differences, divide them in a general way as follows: primitive worlds, intended for the first incarnations of the human soul, worlds of trial and expiation, where evil dominates, regenerative worlds, where souls who still have something to expiate may absorb new strength by resting from the fatigue of struggle, happy worlds, where good outweighs evil, and heavenly or divine worlds, the habitations of purified spirits, where the good reigns completely. Earth belongs to the trial and expiation category, and that is why humans on it are the target of so many miseries. Spirits who incarnate on any one world are not connected to it forever, nor do they complete on it all the progressive phases they must traverse in order to reach perfection. When on one particular world they have reached the degree of advancement that it offers, they go to a more advanced one, and so on until they have reached the state of pure spirits. These various worlds are the stations on which they find elements of progress proportional to their advancement. It is a recompense for them to go to a world of a higher order, just as it is a punishment to prolong their stay on an unhappy world or to be relegated to one that is even unhappier than the one they are forced to leave when they are obstinate in wrongdoing.
Earth's destiny, causes of human misery.
Amazed at finding on Earth so much wickedness and bad passions, so many miseries and infirmities of every sort, one might come to the conclusion that the human species is a very sad thing. This judgment arises from the limited point of view of those who hold it, and it gives an erroneous idea of the whole. One must remember that not all of humankind is to be found on the earth, but only a small fraction of it. Actually, the human species entails all beings endowed with reason, who populate the innumerable worlds of the universe. Hence, what is Earth's population when compared to the total population of all those worlds? Much less than that of a very small village when compared to a great empire. The material and moral situation of Earth's humankind is nothing surprising considering Earth's destination and the nature of those who inhabit it. One would form a very erroneous idea of the inhabitants of a large city if they were judged by the populace of its infamous and sordid quarters. In a hospital, one sees only the sick or maimed. In a penitentiary, one sees all sorts of turpitudes and vices in one place. In unhealthy regions, most of the inhabitants are pale, weak, and sickly. Well then, imagine the earth as being a sordid district, a hospital, a penitentiary, and an unhealthy region, because it is all of these at once, and you will understand why afflictions outweigh joys. This happens because one does not send healthy persons to a hospital, nor those who have practiced no wrongdoing to houses of correction, for neither hospitals nor houses of correction are places of delight. Hence, in the same way that in a city the whole population is not in hospitals or prisons, the whole of humankind is not on the earth. And just as one leaves the hospital when one has been cured and the prison when one has served one's time, humans leave the earth for happier worlds when they have been healed of their moral infirmities.
The Spirit's teachings, less evolved and highly evolved worlds.
Classifying worlds as either less evolved or highly evolved is more relative than absolute. A world is less evolved or highly evolved in relation to those that are above or below it on the scale of progression. Taking the Earth as a point of comparison, one can form an idea of the state of a less evolved world by supposing its inhabitants to be at the degree of the primitive or barbaric cultures that may still be found on Earth's surface, and which are holdovers from Earth's primitive state. On the least evolved worlds, the beings that inhabit them are, to a certain extent, rudimentary. They have the human form but are devoid of any comeliness. Their instincts are not tempered by any sentiment of refinement or benevolence, or by any notions of what is fair or not fair. Brute force is the only law. With no industry or inventions, they spend life in conquest of food. Nevertheless, God does not abandon any of His creatures. In the darkest depths of their mind lies the latent, sometimes more, sometimes less developed, vague intuition of a supreme being. This instinct is enough to render some more advanced than others and to prepare their ascension to a fuller, for they are not degraded beings but children who are growing up. In between the lowest and highest degrees there are innumerable levels, and in the pure, dematerialized spirits shining in glory it is difficult to recognize those who used to animate such primitive beings, in the same way that in the adult person it is difficult to recognize the embryo. In worlds that have reached a highly evolved degree, the conditions of moral and material life are very different from those on Earth. The corporeal form, as everywhere else, is always the human form, but embellished, perfected and, above all, purified. The body possesses nothing of earthly materiality, and consequently is subject neither to the needs, the diseases, nor the deteriorations that the predominance of matter engenders. The senses, more refined, have perceptions that the denseness of the organs stifle on this world. The specific lightness of the body enables rapid and easy locomotion. Instead of dragging itself laboriously over the ground, it slides, so to speak, over the surface or glides through the air with no other effort than that of the will, in the way in which angels are portrayed, or in which the ancients imagined the Manes in the Elysian fields. Depending on their wishes, humans retain the features of their past migrations and appear to their friends as they were known to them, but illuminated by a divine light and transfigured by inner impressions that are always of an elevated nature. Instead of pallid faces stricken by suffering and passions, intelligence and life radiate from that splendor, which painters have portrayed by the halo or aureole of the saints. The little resistance that matter poses to highly advanced spirits renders the development of bodies more rapid and infancy short or almost non-existent. Life, in the absence of worries and troubles, is proportionally much longer than on Earth. In principle, longevity is proportional to the degree of advancement of each world. Death holds none of the horrors of decomposition. Far from being an object of dread, it is regarded as a happy transformation, because on such worlds the doubt as to the future does not exist. During life, the soul, not being enclosed within compact matter, radiates and enjoys a lucidity that places it in an almost permanent state of emancipation and allows for the free transmission of thought. On such blissful worlds, relationships between nations are always friendly and are never disturbed by the ambition of dominating their neighbor, or by war, which is its consequence. There are neither masters, nor slaves, nor privileges of birth, only moral and intellectual ascendancy establish the differences of conditions and confer supremacy. Authority is always respected, for it is conferred only on those who have merit, and it is always exercised with justice. Humans do not try to raise themselves above others, but only above themselves by striving for perfection. Their objective is to reach the class of the pure spirits, and this unceasing desire is not a torment but a noble ambition that makes them study ardently in order to become like them. All the tender and elevated sentiments of human nature are found there, augmented and purified. Hatred, petty jealousies, and the menial covetousness of envy are unknown. A bond of love and fraternity unites all humans. The strongest help the weakest. Their possessions vary to a greater or lesser degree according to what they have acquired by means of their intelligence, but no one suffers for lack of necessities, since no one is undergoing expiation. In other words, evil does not exist there. On your world, you need evil in order to sense the good, night to admire the light, sickness to appreciate health. On highly evolved worlds, such contrasts are not necessary. Eternal light, eternal beauty and eternal serenity of the soul provide an eternal joy that is disturbed neither by the anxieties of material life nor contact with bad persons, who have no access there. This is what the human spirit finds most difficult to comprehend. Ingenious at painting the torments of hell, it could never represent the delights of heaven. Why not? Because, being little evolved, it has borne only pain and misery, and not having glimpsed the heavenly splendor, it can only speak of what it knows. As the human spirit evolves and purifies itself, however, the horizon becomes resplendent and it comprehends the good that lies ahead as well as the evil that has been left behind. Nevertheless, such fortunate worlds are not privileged, for God is not partial toward any of his children. He gives to all the same rights and faculties to ascend to such worlds. God makes all start from the same point and endows no one with more than the others. The highest positions are accessible to all, and it is their responsibility to win them through labor, to reach them as soon as possible, or to linger through centuries and centuries in the underworlds of humankind. Summary of the teaching of all the high-order spirits.
Worlds of trial and expiation. What can I tell you about worlds of expiation that you do not already know? Since all you have to do is consider the earth that you inhabit. Superior intelligence in a large number of its inhabitants indicates that it is not a primitive world meant for the incarnation of spirits who have just left the hands of the Creator. The innate qualities that they bring with them are proof that they have already lived and achieved a certain amount of progress. However, the numerous vices to which they are inclined are also an indication of great moral imperfection. This is why God has placed them on an ungrateful earth, so that they may expiate on it their wrongs through pain-filled labor and the miseries of life until they have merited going to a happier world. Nevertheless, not all the spirits that incarnate on the earth are sent there in expiation. The so-called primitive peoples are spirits who have just left infancy. They are there for an education, so to speak, and to develop themselves through contact with more advanced spirits. Next come the semi-civilized peoples, comprised of the same spirits in more advanced stages of progress. Generally speaking, these are the indigenous peoples of Earth, who have evolved little by little over long centennial periods. Some of them have been able to reach the intellectual advancement of more enlightened peoples. Spirits undergoing expiation are foreigners there, if we may so express ourselves. They have already lived on other worlds, from which they were banished due to their persistence in wrongdoing, and because they were a cause of disturbance to the good inhabitants. They have been relegated to living for a time among less advanced spirits, and because they carry with them their developed intelligence and the seed of acquired knowledge, they have the mission of helping them advance. That is why punished spirits are found in the midst of the most intelligent peoples. Having more sensitivity, the miseries of life are bitterer to them because sufferings bruise them more deeply than they bruise the primitive peoples, whose moral sense is more obtuse. Consequently, the earth offers one of the types of expiatory worlds whose variety is infinite, but which possess the common characteristic of serving as places of exile for spirits who rebel against the law of God. There, such spirits must struggle simultaneously against the wickedness of humankind and the inclemency of nature, a twofold and arduous endeavor that at the same time develops the qualities of both heart and intelligence. It is thus that God, in His divine goodness, enables punishment itself to revert to the advantage of the spirit's progress. St. Augustine, Paris, 1862. Regenerative worlds.
Among the stars that twinkle in the blue canopy of the firmament, how many worlds there are like yours, designated by the Lord for trial and expiation? But there are also some that are even more miserable and some that are better, as there are those of transition, which may be called regenerative. Each planetary vortex, moving in space around a common center, draws along with it its own worlds, primitive worlds, worlds of exile, worlds of trial, regenerative worlds, and blissful worlds. We have already spoken to you of those worlds where the newborn soul is placed, when, still ignorant of good and evil, it can progress towards God, Lord of itself, in possession of its free will. You have already been informed regarding the ample faculties given to the soul so that it may practice the good. But alas, there are those who succumb, and God, not desiring their annihilation, permits them to go to those worlds where, from incarnation to incarnation, they purify themselves, regenerate themselves, and return worthy of the glory that has been reserved for them. Regenerative worlds serve as a transition between worlds of expiation and worlds of bliss. The repentant soul finds peace and repose on them, and ends up purifying itself. Of course, on such worlds humans are still subject to the laws that govern matter. Their humanity still experiences your sensations and desires, but is free of the muddled passions that enslave you. On regenerative worlds there is no longer the pride that renders your heart silent, the envy that tortures it, and the hatred that suffocates it. The word love is written on every brow, a perfect equity governs social relationships, and all acknowledge God, endeavoring to evolve towards Him by following His laws. Yet, on them there is still not perfect bliss, but the dawning of happiness. Human beings there are still of flesh, and therefore subject to the vicissitudes from which only completely dematerialized beings are freed. There are still trials to endure, but they do not have the pungent anguish of expiation. Compared to the earth, these worlds are very happy, and many of you would be happy to settle on them, for they are the calm after the storm, the convalescence after a cruel disease. Since humans there are less absorbed by material things, they foresee the future better than you do. They comprehend the fact that there are other joys that the Lord promises to those who render themselves worthy, when death has once again reaped their bodies in order to bestow upon them true life. It is then that the delivered soul hovers above all the horizons. There are no longer material and coarse senses, but the senses of a pure and celestial perispirit breathing emanations from God, in aromas of love and charity that emanate from His heart. But alas, on those worlds humans are still fallible, and the spirit of evil has not completely lost its empire. Not to advance is to retreat, and if individuals are not firm on the pathway of the good, they may fall back to worlds of expiation where new and more fearsome trials await them. So at night, at the time of repose and prayer, contemplate that blue canopy in the innumerable spheres that shine above your heads, and ask yourselves which ones lead to God, and ask Him for a regenerative world to open up to receive you after your expiation on the earth. Saint Augustine, Paris, 1862.
The progression of worlds.
Progress is one of the laws of nature. All animate and inanimate beings of creation are submitted to it through the goodness of God, who wills for everything to grow and prosper. Destruction, which to humans appears to be the end of things, is only a means of reaching a more perfect state through transformation, since everything dies in order to be reborn, and nothing suffers annihilation. At the same time that living beings progress morally, the worlds they inhabit progress materially. Whoever could follow a world in its different phases, from the instant in which the first atoms destined to constitute it began to agglomerate, would see it traveling an incessantly progressive scale, but by degrees imperceptible to each generation, and offering its inhabitants a dwelling more agreeable as they themselves advance on the path of progress. Thus, the progress of human beings, animals, their helpers, plants, and the forms of habitations progress in parallel. Nothing in nature remains stationary. How grand this idea is, and how worthy of the magnificence of the Creator. On the other hand, how small and unworthy of the Creator's power is the idea that focuses His kindness and providence on the imperceptible grain of sand that is the earth and restricts humankind to the few humans who inhabit it. The earth, according to that law, was once materially and morally in a state inferior to today, and under this dual aspect it will reach a more elevated degree. It has arrived at one of its periods of transformation, in which, from being an expiatory world, it will become a regenerative one. Then humans will be happy because God's law will reign on it. St. Augustine, Paris, 1862.